Welcome back to the Renaissance Space podcast, where we have the opportunity to listen and better understand life in education. I am delighted to be co-hosting this episode with my colleague Andy Small, our assessment specialist for numeracy and mathematics. Today we have the pleasure of talking with Kat Edel and Rob Jennings from the Dyscalculia network, and are looking forward to learning how we can make the word Dyscalculia trip off the tongue. So a very warm welcome to Rob and Kat. Thank you for coming. We're really excited to hear and learn something that a lot of people probably don't know very much about. But before we start, Kat, would you like to say a few words about you? Anything you'd like to share?
Good morning, everybody. My name's Kat Edel. I'm a Dyscalculia specialist teacher. I've been a primary school teacher for 30 years this year, and I really love working with people with dyscalculia. And in 2003, I trained to be a dyscalculia maths difficulties specialist, and it revolutionised how I taught maths and my feelings around maths education. And several years ago, I started working for myself. I'm running my own business as a maths tutor. And it was then that I realised that there was no central organisation in the UK working to support people with dyscalculia. There was lots of organisations for ADHD, for dyslexia and so on, and nothing for dyscalculia. And this little idea for the Dyscalculia network was born. And fortunately, I met Rob and convinced him that it was a great idea. Didn't take much convincing, to be fair, because he was thinking the same thing. And the Dyscalculia network was born.
Well, beautifully handled there, Kat, because that's a wonderful segue into Rob. Would you like to share your experience too, please?
Yeah, absolutely. I'm Rob Jennings, and I've been teaching specialist maths, which feels like probably about 100 years. I teach in a number of schools at the moment across London and the Southeast. I do a lot of teacher training at the moment as well. I've always been interested in maths, but I'm particularly interested in helping people that really struggle with maths, and that's what I've been doing recently, and I love it. I'm really passionate about it. And so if I need to shut up or be quiet, let me know, because that's what I like to do.
That is not a problem at all. Thank you so much. When I was doing a bit of research around dyscalculia, I discovered that something like 6% of the population, so 1 million people maybe, but most importantly, that includes children and young people. And as you've both identified, this is an area that you're both involved with and interested in. And I think I'm going to say having a sense of number. Is that a strong enough phrase for a definition? Kat, would you like to start?
Yeah, sure. I mean, I think that the definition of dyscalculia, in fact, is something that's undergoing a transitional period at the moment, because dyscalculia is very far behind dyslexia in terms of research. But there has actually been a group in the UK who are currently working at looking at a new definition of dyscalculia in line with some new research that's come out in the last couple of years. But currently we say it's a specific and persistent difficulty in understanding numbers, which can lead to a range of difficulties across mathematics. And I think what's really important to know is it occurs across all age ranges, levels of education and ability levels. And it also often co-occurs with other conditions. I'm not sure about the word conditions, but dyslexia, ADHD, specific learning difficulties, but also medical conditions as well. And it is to do with number sense and magnitude, how big and small things are. But it's quite complicated. There's more to it just than the number sense.
Rob, is there anything you'd like to add to that? Or
No, I think it's really important to stress that it's not an indication of one's ability in terms of their levels of education or their ability generally. And as Kat says, it does impact on individuals across the board, across all ages. But I think it's really important to sort of look at the co-occurrence with other conditions, because as educators, we know we're trying to do our best for people. And I think an awareness of those co-occurrence is really important in the classroom.
I've certainly witnessed that firsthand, and thanks for clarifying that, Rob. I think it is fundamentally really, really important. But I also know that, Kat, you spoke about the specific and the persistent difficulties. It's very easy to conflate this concept of dyscalculia with other challenges that students might face in the maths classroom, and particularly maybe maths anxiety, for example. Rob, do you mind sort of talking a bit to that?
Yeah, not at all. So I think it's important to differentiate the two terms, if you like. And Kat's just talked about dyscalculia. Maths anxiety can affect anybody, and it affects people when they sort of are confronted with a maths problem or a maths challenge. It could be in everyday life, such as dividing up the bill in a restaurant or something like that, or it could be as simple as entering into a maths classroom and feeling that sense of fear, panic. They're the physical sides, but there's also the psychological side where it often allows you, it makes your sort of brain go blank. So stuff that you've learned recently, you completely could forget that. And I think it's important to state that pretty much all dyscalculic individuals will also, because they often are failing at maths, will absolutely have maths anxiety as well to add to their troubles and challenges.
Thank you. And you sort of reference one specific example there in terms of somebody's mind going blank, maybe with something that ordinarily they may be able to recall. Kat, what are the sort of other key things to look out for that might indicate that there's some sort of math-specific challenge existing within a young person in the classroom?
Absolutely. There's lots of things that we can notice as educators when we're in the classroom. Often those things, the initial things we notice is a difficulty learning those basic maths facts, things like number bonds or times tables. They're the things that teachers tend to notice first. But it's also to do with things like not really being able to estimate the size of a number. So struggling to know how many there are in a simple concept, how many apples are in the bag and so on. A difficulty with ordering and sequencing numbers, and also often with directionality, the left and the right, which can also go along with dyslexia. Difficulty with recognising number symbols. So things like confusing add and times, things like that, or not understanding the vocabulary around that. Maths language can be really tricky. And also subitizing, so recognising a small number of objects without counting. And we see that then reflected in those everyday maths tasks, the things like the money and the time and things like that.
I would also say that a lot of dyscalculic individuals really have what we call immature strategies. So a lot of their kind of techniques are counting in ones, often with fingers, and that makes counting backwards really difficult as well, because often they have memory challenges. And counting backwards requires a lot of working memory ability, and they kind of get plateaued and they don't really develop any more strategies in terms of things. And they just rely on that counting ones.
Okay, we were talking earlier, weren't we, Margaret, about working memory and long-term memory, and that inefficiency, I guess, in strategies is something that, again, I've witnessed firsthand.
I think also what's interesting about this, I can remember, I was going to say teaching probability in year 5. Maybe I should say attempting to teach probability in year 5, which I have to say I'm glad it was moved into year 7 when the national curriculum was redefined there. But, it seems to be, and everyone talks about the fact that certainly in this country, not in many others, is it acceptable to say, well, I'm not really very good at maths. Or, talking to parents and the mother says, oh, well, that's really his father's domain. That sort of accepted culture, almost, I would say. And hand in hand goes teachers who may also fall into a specific speciality or lack of knowledge, maybe. You both mentioned that you're still teaching, so it's still in your DNA and you're still actively participating.
I was going to say, I think kind of we prepare our maths teachers really poorly, within the universities that prepare teachers of the future. There needs to be a much greater emphasis on teaching children with SEN, because at the moment it's hardly any. And even when they do have that day looking at SEN, often there's hardly any maths in there. What you're developing is teachers that leave, and especially in primary, they're a little bit anxious about teaching maths. And that often translates itself across to the children when they're teaching. And so, we need to, across the board, look at promoting maths as a really positive role model and a positive kind of perception that maths is all around us. It's not just that theoretical, that abstract concept. we need to make it relevant and fun.
Yeah, that's what I was just about to interrupt with. I was about to say it's the fun bit, and also saying to parents that to try not to say at home, oh, I was rubbish at maths too, or to the teacher, oh, I know it's tricky, and to try and be positive about just noticing the little maths that they probably do without realising it, the weighing, the measuring, the, paying the bill in the supermarket, and noticing the fun in maths and playing maths games, because that really can make a difference to children's perception of maths, because I think it's not just about the educational environment, it's also about the overall environment, everything that impacts that child along their journey.
Yeah.
And maybe, teacher training, I don't know if you have the opportunity ever to get in front of skits or teacher training. You do.
Yeah, we do.
Fantastic. That's great news.
So, that's kind of one of our objectives at the network, is to sort of get in front of people, teachers of the future, to try and sculpt and make them awareness. I think by raising awareness, that everything else, it puts the discussion on the table, and it allows us to talk passionately at things like this. I think it's really important to get in front of the teachers of the future to try and sculpt and try and put the discussion on the table. Dyscalculia really does impact people, not just in schools and colleges, throughout their whole lives. And, what we need to do as educators is to make that change to benefit everyone in the long term. I think the problem also, people would never say in literacy, oh, I've never been good at reading, or I'm illiterate. That just wouldn't happen. But I think it's really important that the perception of maths in our schools, often to be good at maths, you have to be fast at maths, which is completely ridiculous, because everyone works at different levels, and being fast at maths, and that how we generate that sort of feeling is by doing things like you've got to answer 45 questions in 30 seconds and stuff. So that perception of people work at their own pace, and when we teach maths, we teach about understanding to try and sort of allow that individual to sort of think about what they're doing, and to introduce reasoning strategies rather than just learning things by rote, which we absolutely hate.
Yeah, there's almost a conflation of the concepts of fluency and efficiency and speed, and you can be efficient, you can be fluent in your mathematics without being the fastest in the room. I think that's really important.
And we miss out there children who have that slower processing and struggle a little bit with working memory. They get missed out of being able to show what they can do as well. So I'll see a child's report and it'll say they know no times tables. And I'm like, well, they do, but they're not going to be able to fire that. They're not going to be able to answer really, really quickly. It's going to take them a bit of time to give you an answer. They can reason them and they understand it really well, but they don't know them off by heart to just give you an answer in 2 seconds. And I think we do have to move away from that. And personally, I feel like, politically speaking, the Year 4 times table test does not help that. And I'm not saying I don't agree with fluency, but again, it's speed and fluency being mixed.
Because what you're generating for the people that struggle is maths anxiety. It's a direct route to that sort of, and disengagement with maths, and that's something that we want to avoid, whether they're dyscalculic, maths difficulties, or just having maths anxiety caused because they have memory challenges.
And I think in primary, where there is maybe one teacher who is responsible for all of the curriculum, so maths and reading, I think then gets even more complex and even more diluted when you've got an English department and a maths department, and the maths department believe it's the English department's job to teach vocabulary. And yet if they don't know the technical language and they don't know the technical words within the subject, that's a challenge too.
Yeah, the language of maths is quite extensive. Why do we have 7 different ways of saying subtract? And a lot of people develop knowing 1 or 2. I think we have to, as educators, make sure that we do teach that breadth of language, because it's so important. The one that gets me is always the difference between for subtraction. I always, my students always struggle with that. What does it actually mean? Difference between doesn't sound like it should be subtraction.
Well, I'm probably showing my age, but the difference between an oblong and a rectangle, but let's not get embroiled in that one.
We can talk about that later, Margaret. Rob, I know you've particularly done a lot of work looking at the role of assessment in this field. And I guess my question to you would be sort of how, I won't surprise you to know that I believe that sort of formative assessment, that assessment of and particularly for learning is pretty fundamental. How much of a role can that play in helping with sort of identifying a need and that ongoing sort of wraparound support?
Yeah, I think it's really vital, because I think a lot of intervention in schools is probably done in the wrong area, often done in the wrong area, because we really need that sort of detail of where things are starting to break down. And I think sometimes the intervention, if you're doing fractions in school, in your class, often, and they're struggling with that fractions understanding, often the intervention is more of the same. They take off and they do more fractions. But what we're saying is a proper assessment, analysing where things are starting to break down. It could be that they struggle with multiplication and division, so they can't understand how to find equivalent fractions to be able to sort of make that flexibility and fluency within that sort of area of maths. And so the assessment's key. And we often sort of start on the Dyscalculia network website. We have a checklist, which we love. It's a really good way of starting that process of gathering information to find out how someone is performing according to a number of identifiers.
Yeah, great. And my experience and the conversations that we've had and I've had with others as well is around, actually, there's the importance of the prerequisite skills. You can't expect young people to be able to do everything without those building blocks in place. I certainly led many a CPD session for our staff teams over the years around that, but also that sort of multidimensionality of maths. It doesn't have to be the case. I think you said very, very early on in this conversation about the fact that you can get some quite high performing young people who will experience challenges associated with dyscalculia, and doesn't necessarily mean that there's this uniformity to a low level of attainment necessarily. Kat, can you speak a bit around that? Is that fair to say?
I think that each individual with dyscalculia will present differently. So some adults with dyscalculia, and we have an amazing adult advisory board, some people have dyslexia, dyspraxia, dyscalculia, and they struggled throughout school with academic life in general. However, they are hugely gifted in the area of drama, music, creative, artwork, all of those things. They have huge strengths, and many of them were lucky enough to have support in those areas from their families or from people at school who really made a difference in those. But equally, we've got some people who are very academic. Peter springs to mind, who's got a PhD, but has dyscalculia and really struggled with maths. And I'm not saying those other people aren't academic per se, but they have different strengths. And I think that everybody has different strengths and areas that they find challenging. And the key to all teaching is finding out how we can support people with their weaknesses whilst building them up in their strengths and using their strengths to help them learn as well.
Very powerful, very, very interesting insight as well into just the breadth of I was going to say the problem, but it's not a problem unless we make it a problem. And that awareness, I had a look on your website. I'm just going to push that, and we'll make sure that that's available for people to have a look at. And the way in which you've articulated the various areas for support and opportunity. And on one of the bits I was reading, there was a suggestion that you use the word yet at the end of a sentence if somebody is struggling. And it's such a little word and can have such a huge impact and needs to make things much more positive. So my question really is, what else can we be doing to, other than things like this, which obviously are really important, to ensure people are more aware of what it's like to be in that world?
I think there's lots of things we can do, and I think it's really nice that now it's on the table and we're we're talking openly about dyscalculia and trying to sort of identify what it is and how it impacts on people. I think we have to be calm. I think we have to be really positive with the individuals, and that's just not in the classroom, but also at home, because we're trying to sort of develop a person in small steps. We need to provide the individuals with some scaffolding, lots of opportunities to revise and repeat stuff. I think that doesn't happen very often. We zip around on our curriculum because it's a huge curriculum between different topics. But when I'm teaching someone, I always make sure that we have some repetition and revision next time in the next lesson. So I use maths games. I think maths games are a fantastic way of an informal assessment, if you like, because if someone's playing a game on a topic I've just taught, then I'm going to know immediately what they know and what they don't know. So those sort of things. And I think just to be calm and to be really positive about it, because these people are all struggled with maths and they kind of think they're stupid in some way, and they're not. Peter's a perfect example of that, being a PhD individual. And I just think that we need to sort of get these people that are in these bottom sets moving. And we need to assess them to find out where things are starting to go wrong. And then we need to put the right implementation, the right teaching plan in place for those individuals, and not what's been done in the classroom.
And if you don't mind me saying, the way that we're trying to do this through raising awareness is by offering training for teaching, but also we've got lots of free resources on our website. So there's top tips sheets for teachers. There's top tips for parents there, things that they can ask as accommodations for school, because sometimes parents come to us not knowing what to do. And also they don't know the word dyscalculia. So it's really important that we raise awareness of the overall word of dyscalculia, because the word dyscalculia isn't known about. So parents search for dyslexia with numbers, they search for maths difficulties, they search for a child who's struggling with maths, and they don't know dyscalculia, which is why we were so pleased it was on EastEnders earlier this year as well, because everyone heard the word. We're like, wow, amazing. But it's that knowing the word and knowing where to look to get the help and advice. And frequently when parents do find us, they're like, oh my goodness, we didn't know you existed, and this is amazing that we can get some support. And also we offer an assessor and tutor index on our website, and again, often parents don't know where to go to get that assessment privately, if that's a route they can go down, or if they can't, they don't know where to get information to take to the school, because not every school knows about dyscalculia. And that's something that really does need to change. Rob and I really want to see every school and every teacher at least knowing what dyscalculia is.
And that feeds in beautifully to the whole relationship between school and home. And you've identified, and again, you've mentioned your website, there is a bit on there for parents, and your child or you yourself don't need to be suffering with dyscalculia to have a look and see what's on there. General advice like, baking, shopping, being enthusiastic about maths, they should just be commonplace, not because somebody has a problem or is struggling.
I think we all recognise that maths is very abstract. And what we try to do is to we have this kind of approach for teaching where we use concrete materials a lot to sort of demonstrate how maths works. We visualise and verbalise, get them to talk. We include pictorial representations of what we do before we even get onto the abstract side. And I think that's really important to make that awareness for teachers and parents alike, that we have to make it more visual for individuals to be able to see what's going on. And the fact that we use maths all around us in cooking and stuff is fantastic. I think that's really important.
I think it's so important to make as many moments as you can, maths moments. I had a sort of colleague from about 10 years ago the other day who repeated that mantra back to me. Thankfully, I managed to embed that a little bit into one of my schools. And actually, one of the other things I was really passionate about, I'm really pleased to hear you, Rob, not just talk about concrete, pictorial, abstract, but also verbal. And there was a huge agenda around talk for writing. I think talk for maths is something that is really underplayed and undervalued. So, absolutely.
So thank you both very much for coming and talking to us. I've learned a whole load of things, even though I read your website and I try to do my research, hearing you articulate some of those elements has been absolutely fascinating. We've probably got a couple of minutes if there was anything that you felt you haven't had the opportunity to share or talk about. Now's your moment.
I would just say that if any teacher is listening, don't be embarrassed to come forward and ask for help with children in your class or situations. We run regular free Q&A sessions, which are advertised on our Eventbrite page, where you can just come along and ask any question to Rob or I, whoever happens to be running that session. And that's really useful for teachers or parents. And we also do monthly webinars where you can get information. And all of that's always on our social media as well. So you can always ask us a question, drop us an email, and Rob or I will always do our best to help. And if we don't know, we'll find someone who does.
And I'd also like to say is that this is an international issue, not just in the UK or in London or in the Southeast. It does affect people across the world. And we recognise that. And in this year, one of our objectives is to sort of try and do more international stuff, not just in England. So we're also doing events in Scotland, Northern Ireland, and we're off to Wales this weekend for the national show. So, it's really important to us that we help people, across the world.
Brilliant. And I'm looking forward to our conversation as part of a GL education webinar for schools across the world as well.
So thank you both very much for sharing your knowledge, your understanding, passion, just wonderful. Thank you. Actually, the top tip, I must say, if you're struggling to say dyscalculia, Rob says, rhyme it with Julia. So that's the big takeaway. Let's use that word, as Kat said. Let's use it all the time and not be put off.
Fantastic. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thank you both.
Well, wherever your space or place, I hope you learnt as much as we did. Whether you are somebody who would like support as a teacher, parent, or even for yourself, remember, Julia rhymes with Culia. If you've enjoyed this episode of the Renaissance Space podcast, please take a moment to rate and review us wherever you listen to your podcasts. And don't forget that you can catch up on all previous episodes at www.renlearn.co.uk/podcast. If you'd like to get in touch, please do email us at podcast@renaissance.com. Thank you for listening. If you enjoyed this episode of the Renaissance Space podcast, please check out the Education Joining the Dots podcast from our colleagues at GL Assessment. Thank you.